The purpose of this meeting and going forward, all of our organizing meetings, is to create a space to share best practices to help guide us because this work is extremely difficult work. It takes dedication, takes loyalty, transparency. It takes being solution oriented. And that's why I wanted to start this one off with just some guidance about being solution oriented and just to share my experience, like why I know, not just something that I feel, but why I know that being solution oriented is really something that works. Um, so let me just start off by saying solution oriented organizing is about the way that we have our mindset. Our thoughts lead to the way that we feel, our feelings lead to our actions, and our actions lead to our results. And I just want to share an experience just about that. So I grew up in an extremely strict religious Jamaican household. And I don't know if you have an experience with that, but we grew up Seventh-day Adventist, which means that like Friday nights, we have to celebrate the Sabbath. I couldn't wear certain clothing. I couldn't wear certain jewelry or jewelry at all. Skirts had to be below the knee. Children should be seen, not heard, especially that my mom came from Jamaica. So I'm first generation. So there was all of this like adjusting to like America. And, how am I as this young child kind of going to thrive and survive in this environment? But I remember one incident in particular. And Jamaicans have this uncanny way of knowing like what you're going to do before you do it. So they reprimand you even before you've committed the crime. So my mom, she used to work on some Sundays, and this Sunday she left me home with my grandmother. She told me before she left for work, she said, make sure that you do your homework. By the time I get back in the afternoon, I want all your homework to be done. So I didn't want any problems. So I made sure the first thing that I did was my homework. So I'm playing. My mom gets home about 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the first thing she does is say, why didn't you do your homework? And I said, I did do my homework. And we're going back and forth. And I'm about 9. And my mom doesn't believe me and like proceeds to like chase me around the house saying that I didn't do my homework. And then she proceeded also to then ground me. So I was grounded for a week for something that I didn't do. Like I did my homework. So then I'm crying. My grandmother pops up. I don't know where she was all this time, but all of a sudden she pops up. Like, you didn't hear the yelling? My grandmother pops up. She's like, why are you crying? And I said, oh, because mommy, she grounded me. She said I didn't do my homework, and I did my homework this morning. And my grandmother said, of course you did your homework. I saw you do your homework. And she looked at my mother and said, why did you ground her? She did her homework this morning. My mother looked at me, looked at my grandmother, walked off. I didn't get an apology. And I'm not even sure if I wasn't like taken off of being grounded.
Being grounded.
But in that moment, what I discerned is that when someone is looking for a problem, all they're going to see is the problem, even if the solution is like right there. And all she had to do was ask. And so from that point, like even as a child, I thought I'm always going to ask questions. I never want to make an assumption that's the complete opposite of who this person is. And that just sort of like put me in this place where I could even be open to solution oriented organizing. And so what we're really saying is that we don't want to make any assumptions. We don't want to be presumptuous. We as house people, we're not going to know what those people in need actually need unless we do that extra piece of work, which is strike up a conversation and ask them, what do you need? So I just wanted to share like a little bit of our background just to like recap, because I know you've been with us for a year.
Yeah.
And it's gone so quickly, but we never have been able to have these types of organizing meetings, which I'm really happy we can. So just to share briefly, the Greater New Orleans Citizens Relief Team was founded in 2020 by myself under the tutelage of 60-year civil rights veteran Curtis Muhammad in an effort to develop a movement of common, everyday citizens working together for the good of all. So the first notice that we sent to the city at the beginning of April 2020, is that we are requesting that the city of New Orleans set aside a percentage of the housing stock under the city's control that is abandoned and not being used for the purpose of being renovated by and for the homeless. Our team is ready to provide professional, skilled folk who will teach and train all who participate in learning the construction skills while they build their home. There will be an educational component that will not only teach construction skills, but all the skills required to facilitate a healthy and prosperous life. We will organize healthcare professionals, business professionals, educators, etc., to participate in an intensive educational process geared towards making sure they are ready to care for themselves. So from the beginning, our focus has always been the homeless, the houseless, the unhoused, and the displaced citizens in our society by creating a space to teach them to believe they can do better and how they can become better. The purpose of our organizing meetings is to develop a space where all people who believe in freedom and justice can come together to learn better practices when building relationships with the unhoused and each other. So we're actually using the Ella Baker style of organizing, which is bottom-up organizing, which essentially means the ones who are suffering have the biggest voice and are also being trained to be the leaders of our organization. Do you have any questions so far?
Mm-mm.
All right. So it's important, I believe it's important for all of us, the intelligentsia, the academics, the well-wishers, the well-meaning folks, to understand that the role of volunteers and organizers is to serve the community most in need, and not to tell the community in need what they should do in order to get out of their situation. So any doctor worth anything asks their patient to identify their pain before treating them. So the same approach applies when working with the unhoused and the poor. Like, could you imagine you go to the doctor and all of a sudden he starts treating you for like a broken foot, and you're like, I came in here because I have chronic migraine headaches. But he would never know that if he didn't ask the question. Same thing with my mom. If she asked, did you do your homework, before coming in with the rod and telling me that I didn't do my homework, all of that confusion could have been alleviated. So that's part of practicing the solution, is that we're saying, I don't know all the answers. I don't know anything. I don't know everything. So in trying to find a solution, I'm going to ask the people in need, the ones that I'm serving, what do you think a solution is? Or I'm going to help you get to your solution by just being a coach and a support. So during all of these meetings, we're definitely going to be tackling some topics that might be uncomfortable. Some of our discussions are going to include race, class, the history of racism in America, and also the alleged dichotomy between houselessness and white supremacy. And so ongoing, there's been a lack of transparency between, and I'll just say black and white, just to keep it simple, but black and white and everything in between, particularly around sharing gifts, skills, talents, and money. And this is the womb that gives birth to white supremacy in its practice. So understand that every white volunteer that works with us is actually practicing the destruction of white supremacy, because what you're saying is, I don't know everything, I don't have the answers, and I'm willing to create this new world where we are all treated equally and we have more of an egalitarian society. So, there's a bunch of different archetypes. I think I pointed out like one that's more obvious. There's the archetype of like a white organizer or a black organizer. But in thinking about how we can become solution oriented, it's important to understand where we're coming from as organizers. So I shared that story about my mom not giving me the time of day, not allowing me to speak my truth, because that's part of the reason that I come to the organizing space, is that I understand how it feels to not be heard. So I listen a little bit more because I have that experience, and that's something that I try to share. So when you understand like what you're coming to organizing with, what skills, what things you need to work on, and you understand what that archetype is, then you can always adjust and say, okay, I need to do this to become a better organizer, to be more solution oriented. Do you want to think about that a sec? Like, do you have any, do you think about what kind of organizer archetype you could be?
I haven't really thought about it before. I think I've always just been ingrained to have a passion for helping others from like, and this goes all the way back even with my grandpa, like even at 92, he was still going in each week and volunteering at his own and sorting through clothes and doing all those things. It was one of those like as long as I'm still able to do it, like I have a purpose to help serve those that I can.
Yeah. So I
Um,
think that's part of your archetype is that you already come willing to help.
yeah.
So that's absolutely. Um, so I think, the reason, for me, the reason why it's so important for us to always go under the bridge and create spaces to speak with the unhoused is because, there's a saying, what you hear, you forget, what you see, you remember, what you do, you understand. And in my experience, the doing, the speaking with the unhoused, the crossing the barrier of it being uncomfortable and me really relating to people and not based on any sort of societal class has helped me to understand and has really like taken down those walls of fear, taken down those walls of thinking that I know more, taken down all the walls that would get in the way of me building a relationship with someone that's temporarily different than I am, but we're all working to try to build them up. Our organization continues to work methodically and diligently, always putting the needs of the in-house first. And we always start by having conversations, asking questions for clarity and not asking questions to prove an existing point that we may have. So we're going to always continue to identify the short and the long-term needs. And that's what we're doing right now. We've identified groceries as the short-term need that is so impactful that our community needs in Central City, but also that our community needs under the bridge. So, Mr. Curtis, just my mentor and someone that really is so vital to this organization. One of my favorite quotes by him is, "We can't build a revolution or a movement without figuring out how to go among the least of us and bring us up." I'm going to say it again. We can't build a movement without figuring out how to go among the least of us to the bottom and bringing us up. So he's essentially saying that we can't build a successful movement unless we include everybody. And a lot of our organizations, we always find a way to exclude the unhoused or to exclude the poor. When you're serving, very rarely are the unhoused or the people that you're serving at the table. So, how effective, and I think we're actually seeing how effective these nonprofit organizations are, or any of these organizations are, in actually getting to the root of the problem. So, it's kind of like a band aid. We're going to make it look like we're doing the work, but we're not teaching the people how to stay out of the gutter. And that's what we want to do. It's not just about giving them the fish and say, here, eat, but it's about teaching them. So I want to say what I really enjoyed about what you shared about you and MK working with Miss Cynthia yesterday is that you utilized something that's like so one of our soft spots in the organization. We don't have enough volunteers. And instead of saying like, this is a problem, we don't have enough volunteers, you utilize that in order to bring more people into volunteer from the community. And that's like big. That's what we want. That's what we've been working on all this time. So to keep solution oriented, we got to continue to ask the ones in need, what do you need? We have to continue to ask the people in pain, where do you hurt? We have to continue to practice humility and discernment when working with each other and working with the unhoused and working with any group that we don't have intimate knowledge about, because it's all about sharing our gifts, skills, our talents, and our resources. So lastly, I have these 4 questions that I always think about when I come to the table. And I'm going to share this with you. And I'm going to share with you in print too. How we treat each other is also how we treat the ones that we serve. So as fellow volunteers, how we treat one another, it's always going to be how we treat the ones that we're serving as well. So I always think, how are my actions loving towards my fellow volunteers? How are my actions loving towards the unhoused? How do my actions show commitment to my fellow volunteers, to our cause of action, to the unhoused? How do my actions exhibit loyalty towards my fellow volunteers and the unhoused? And how do my actions bring honesty and transparency to my fellow volunteers and the unhoused? And when I go through these questions, I take away a lot of the prideful, the emotional responses that I may have to the work. And I get down to we're all here because we are committed. We're all here because we want to see positive change. And we're all here because we're actively doing the work. Do you have any thoughts?
No, that
So
it's all processing. It's like a sponge.
yes, yes. And that's what it always is about. So solution oriented. We're conditioning our mind instead of looking at the problems, which we're so good at doing. We have news programs dedicated to the problem. We have network
Hmm.
TV, the ID network dedicated to problems. We have panel discussions dedicated to problems. We have drugs and food and friendships that are dedicated to problems. But what we don't focus on is the solution. And where we focus our attention is what grows. So, the fundamental principle of reconditioning your mind to be solution oriented will always create more solutions. When you're thinking solutions, when your focus is solutions, we ask questions and we're working together to find them. So, I don't throw my ideas in the pot because I think it's the answer. I throw it in the pot because I'm like, there might be something there. Let's work on it together. And then you throw something back at me, and then Mary Kate, and then another volunteer. And then by the end, we have like one agreement. We have one thing that we can actually do. And that's all we're looking for. Solution oriented equals agreements. And we can agree on at least one thing, I'm sure. So our solutions obviously are providing housing for all without shelter, provide food and water, provide medical care for all, organize educational best practices and strategies for the children, organize people that have contacts with press and social communicators to share our best practices publicly to bring more awareness, organizing medical teams to collect best practices globally and employ those practices where we are. And this is not pie in the sky, but this is like everything that our society needs to run. We're saying that we have the ability to do it in our communities on a small scale, which gives us autonomy, which allows us to do it on a greater scale. So we're allowing ourselves to maintain power and control because we know what our communities need best. So like what's like one solution? Or tell me like what's one problem that you can shift into a solution if you're thinking about this work?
Um, we were slowly starting to talk with Mimi on how we're trying to get the electrical and some of that like stuff done. And I know it helps just to continue to talk about it because everybody kind of goes like, oh, well, what about this? Um, and in some cases he works in contracting as well and kind of knows some people, but we were thinking that there might be a way to figure out for some of the larger companies if they're able to do the electricity as a write-off instead of us potentially having to pay for it, which could open up funds for something else.
That's incredible. I didn't even hear the problem. All I heard was solution. So what I heard was communication, like honesty and transparency, like saying this is where we're at. And in doing that with Mimi, you got back all of these suggestions. And I think
Yeah.
that's great.
Yeah, it's similar with MK because I guess she's kind of talked about it before with her brother-in-law.
Okay.
And that was like oh, maybe this is something we need to further look into and seeing if some of these electrical companies would be willing to help kind of sponsor in this format and
Absolutely.
phrasing it for them that we would be able to give them a tax write-off if they do it as a extra incentive for them if it's not just doing it because they should because that's what we think. But knowing that that's also going to be an incentive to get people involved in a cause.
Absolutely. I love it. Hi, MK.
Hi,
So,
I'm
Oh, hey.
sorry. I thought the meeting was at 10:30. I
no
think I got.
problem. We
Whoa.
recorded it, so it's going to be available on our YouTube page. So I'll go ahead and share that after, like it's
Okay.
yeah. But right now, what we were speaking about was what are some solutions that we have for this organization, and then I actually just started and I said, why don't we identify like what a problem is and like what the solution could be. Devin identified the electrical, said that she had a conversation or y'all had a conversation with Mimi where all these suggestions came out about having a larger electric company possibly sponsor installing the electrical, and it can be a tax write-off. So I was just saying that um, being honest about what our situation is, what the work is, and exactly where we're at actually involved the community, but allowed us to receive some solutions, which I think that's a wonderful one.
Yeah.
What I left off with was the 4 questions that I always come to our group with. And when I say our group, I mean the housed, the unhoused, the neighborhood, like everyone. And how we treat each other is how we treat the ones we serve. So I always ask myself, how are my actions loving towards my fellow volunteers in the unhoused? How do my actions show commitment to our fellow volunteers, to our cause, to the unhoused? How do my actions exhibit loyalty towards my fellow volunteers in the unhoused? And how do my actions bring honesty and transparency towards my fellow volunteers and the unhoused? And, you know, when I ask myself these questions, what it does for me is it takes away all of this ego-driven, pride-driven, emotional-driven action, which says that I have to accomplish something, that I have to get a gold star, that I have to do this because this is how it's going to be seen. And I remember the reasons why I'm doing this, and I remember who I'm doing this with, and that we're all committed, and we're all discerning, and we're all loving this work, even though it's very difficult work. But we're all in this together. And it allows me to accept the help of my fellow volunteers. So I'm going to share some of the text that I said earlier as well. I'm going to share that with y'all, as well as with the YouTube video. But solution-oriented volunteering and organizing, specifically working with our group, is the only way to go, because there's so many problems and there's so many people that are going to try to identify problems. But what we're doing is something new. It's like we're taking the baton from past movements and we're saying, right now, we got to focus on the most discarded people on this planet, the unhoused. We just turn our nose up at them. We give them a quarter. We think it's all right. We might buy them a slice of pizza. We tell our friends, oh, I'm helping people. But nobody is actually intentionally trying to find out, how did you get there? What can I do to help you stay off the street? It might be being committed to a mental health care facility. It might be more education. It might be 5 different ways of helping and support. So it's not a one-stop shop. This is like literally saying, we love a group of people that it seems that no one else loves. And we want to take you and we want to love you and we want to show you that someone cares by asking, how can we help? And identifying those resources.